Hello, I'm Cooper, and today on Cooking with Cleavers we'll be discussing carbon steel versus stainless steel in Chinese slicing cleavers. If you don't know what a Chinese slicing cleaver is, also known as a Chinese chef's knife, there's a link down in the description box for a description video on what these knives are, what their uses are, etc. Today we're talking about stainless steel and carbon steel, specifically for these Chinese slicing cleavers, but in general for kitchen knives as well. For those of you who just want a quick down and dirty, most people will go with a stainless steel knife. It's easier to maintain because it will not rust. But people who like to take care of their knives and have the sharpest knife possible, and potentially a more lively knife, as some people would describe it, a carbon steel blade is best for those people who want more out of their blades than just to cut up stuff and get dinner on the table as quick as possible. Carbon steel is probably more fun. Stainless steel is more practical for most people if they're just chopping up stuff to throw in a pot and then leaving their knife on a cutting board, and then they'll get to cleaning it whenever they get to it. A disclaimer on this discussion of carbon steel and stainless steel. We're specifically talking about steels commonly found in Chinese slicing cleavers, and typically speaking, Chinese slicing cleavers use cheaper metals. And oftentimes a manufacturer will not advertise what type of metal is being used. Typically, if a manufacturer is not advertising the specific type of metal that's being used, they're probably not advertising it on purpose. They're probably using something that's cheap, available, and easy to manufacture rather than something that's fancy and exotic or flashy. If they put something good in it, they'll tell you. If they don't use something good, they probably won't tell you. That doesn't mean that everything's made out of trash steel. It just means that you won't be finding any powdered stainless steels or Shirogami #1s in your Chinese slicing cleavers. If you want to know more about those, you should probably check out like Japanese gyutos and various Japanese knives to get those more exotic steels. But today we're talking about essentially nameless carbon steel and nameless stainless steel knives. Of the 14 or so Chinese cleavers I have these two tell me exactly what type of steel is used in them, that being a clad VG10, so there's a cheaper steel on the outside of a VG10 core, and a clad 8CR13, so they use 1CR13 cladding on the outside of an 8CR13 core. And these two are basically the only knives I have that tell me what type of steel they use. The rest of them are broken down into these use carbon steel, these use stainless steel, and there's a whole bunch of different types of carbon steel and stainless steel. If you find a Chinese cleaver that tells you what type of steel it uses, make sure to research that steel if you can, to see if it's a good steel or not. If you see something that says 3CR13 or 4CR13 or 5CR15, those probably are not the best steels, but again, when you're looking at other Chinese cleavers, they don't advertise what they're using, so they may be using the same things. So the best bet is to research the type of steel and then look at reviews to see what other people say about the steels too. But as I said before, a stainless steel is probably what most people will get because it's easier to use and you can forget about your knife essentially. If you respect your knives more and like to have the best cutting experience possible, carbon steels are generally the way to go for that. That's because in cheap steels, and this is a generalization for cheap steels, there are like hundreds of different formulations of steel out there. But just in general, for cheap steels, a carbon steel typically has higher edge retention, meaning that the edge will hold its sharpness for longer periods of time and through more cutting than a stainless steel knife will. That's typically because carbon steel knives are typically harder than stainless steel knives. That's not always the case, and there's all sorts of things that affect hardness, but in general, for cheap knives, a carbon steel will generally be harder and hold an edge longer. It'll typically also be easier to sharpen to a sharper point. The reason for that is the steel in a carbon steel has a finer structure than the steels in stainless steels, because when you add other elements into the stainless steel, it makes the structure typically more bumpy, I would say, or there are larger particles, pattern particles, in a stainless steel than in a carbon steel. So you can typically sharpen a carbon steel sharper than a stainless steel. So if you want something sharper that holds an edge longer, carbon steel is the way to go. If you want something that's easier to maintain, namely it does not rust, then stainless steel is the way to go. The reason stainless steel doesn't rust, or rusts at a far lower rate than a carbon steel, is because it has at least 10.5% chromium in the blade. And that's the differentiation between carbon steel and stainless steel. Both of them have carbon in them. Some stainless steels even have more carbon than carbon steels do. The only difference, well, not the only difference, but the defining difference is that a stainless steel blade has at least 10.5% chromium. But again, if you want something that you can get sharper and holds an edge longer, typically a carbon steel is the way to go. If you want something you don't have to take as much care of and can forget about and just gets the job done, a stainless steel is the way to go. For carbon steels, care and maintenance includes you basically have to wash the knife immediately after using it. Don't ever leave it on a cutting board after using it. So if you've got if you want to see something really mess up your carbon steel knives, go cut through a bunch of onions or lemons or something really acidic, and then leave it sitting in those juices on a cutting board, and your blade will start rusting very quickly. The care for a carbon steel blade is wash it immediately, dry it immediately, and dry it fully, and then occasionally the blade will need to be oiled. Certainly before you put a carbon steel knife away for storage, it needs to be oiled with a mineral oil preferably, and I personally oil my carbon steel blades probably 2 or 3 times a week when I'm using them. So not daily. Lots of people will oil their knives daily. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But certainly when I'm taking it off of the magnetic knife rack that I keep the knives on that I'm using it for that day or for that week, if I take something off of that to put it over in a storage area, I will always oil the blade to make sure that it doesn't rust. I personally like carbon steel blades. I think they're fun. Potentially my sharpening skills and my cutting skills don't get the fullest out of a carbon steel, so there may not be a whole ton of benefit for me over a stainless steel for a carbon steel, but I think they look cool, they're fun to use, and I like to have something remind me that I have to take care of and respect my knives. So I use carbon steel blades mostly, but I have a mixture of both, and I've got carbon steel blades from a few different manufacturers and stainless steel blades also from a few different manufacturers. Another thing for carbon steel blades, many manufacturers of carbon steel blades will add some sort of coating to control rust on the sides of the blade. So for example, on this blade, it's a SK carbon steel blade. They add a polymer coating across basically the entire blade except for at the edge, so you can still slice with the edge and the edge will still discolor and rust, but the rest of it, well, it will rust if not taken care of. But the rest of it's coated in a polymer, which has so far held up and prevents corrosion on the bulk of the blade. On this CCK 1302, it has this black layer on the top, which is also a corrosion control application for the blades. So there you go. There's carbon steel versus stainless steel. Again, if you just want something to cut up stuff in your kitchen and you don't really care about the cutting experience or taking care of knives, get a stainless steel probably. If you enjoy knives, like taking care of them, and are willing to wash your knife after using it rather than waiting until after you've eaten your meal or whatever, get a carbon steel blade. I think it's got benefits over most stainless steel blades. Yeah, thank you for watching this episode of Cooking with Cleavers. If you'd like to learn more about Chinese slicing cleavers and other Chinese cleavers, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you like this video, please like and share. If you have any comments or questions, please put that down in the comments section. And stay tuned for more tutorial videos on Chinese cleavers, how to use them, what they are, as well as reviews on specific models. Thank you.